So, Mr. Server, thank you for talking to KoSSev. There were two events that took place at two universities this week at the US. Mr. Kurti spoke earlier this week at the panel at Harvard University. He mentioned that he was told by Mr. Grenell on his wish or intention to reach the final deal between Belgrade and Pristina by February, which at the end of the day did not happen. Then he also mentioned that the last information he got, Mr. Grenell wants now the final deal to be broken latest by this September. You also said something similar 3 days ago, speaking to the panel at Columbia University, that you predict the pressures would get higher in July and August for the US policy to take an advantage when, if I recall well your words, the EU would actually get asleep a little bit. So on what basis you have this kind of claim? Is this the result of your analysis, or have you got some kind of insider's information? How realistic these plans are?
Let me just say that I did not base my statement on what Albin Kurti had said. The question of what my statement was based on, I'm going to avoid answering because we all have our sources and methods, but I'm not surprised that he essentially confirmed the same thing, because if you're going to have an agreement in September, the pressure has to be on in July and August after the Serbian elections. So I think the two statements are consistent with each other. I'm not surprised at that, but I have my own sources and methods, and I'll have to keep them to myself in this case.
So do I understand you correctly? There is still an insider's information, not only the result of your analysis?
Certainly not only the result, not at all the result of Albin Kurti's statement.
If that comes in few months, considering the very short deadline on one hand, and on the other hand, the lack of obvious natural reasons for a proper dialogue between the two sides, do we may witness eventually to see the signing of the letter of intentions between the two presidents rather than a proper final deal between the two sides? And if this may happen, could it please Mr. Trump's administration?
I suppose that's a possibility. I mean, the Trump administration is expert at kind of projecting agreements where no real agreements have taken place. They've advertised a lot of things that weren't true. I suppose that's a possibility, but I do think there'll be a lot of pressure to conclude a real agreement by September. And I think, that pressure will clearly, the agreement they want will clearly include some kind of exchange of territory and people, which I think is a terrible mistake.
But I also must remind you that on a number of occasions, in spite of all those public still speculations, as it was not confirmed by neither of the side, including the US administration, on contrary, all the officials on all sides have clearly denied so far that any talks, let alone the result of those talks, were on the land swap, in spite of the public statement of the two presidents. On one side, Mr. Vučić clearly said that he advocates the idea of ethnic delimitation, while on the other hand, Mr. Tači very vocally and very often spoke on a minor correction of border. Also, the request on the 3 municipalities in South Serbia to join Kosovo. But in spite of all those statements, we clearly witnessed the denial on all 3 sides. Do you think it's maybe too free still to claim such a very straightforward statement that the deal will soon include the land swap if we had all three sides who denied that?
Well, I'm not saying it will include the land swaps. I'm saying that that has been discussed and that there's a lot of pressure in favor of it. Mr. Grenell, it's not that I follow every one of his statements, but my memory is that he denied knowing of any such agreement and denied having participated in talks about it. But others in the State Department, in particular, Matt Palmer, for example, did not deny that. You know, diplomatic denials are diplomatic denials. You know, there's far too much smoke in this case for there not to have been a little bit of fire. It's not that I think an agreement will be easy. I think it would be very, very difficult. I just don't believe that Tači is really willing to accept what Serbia will offer, because it won't offer 3 municipalities in southern Serbia. I know that, and I don't think Vučić is prepared to accept what Tači is prepared to offer, which doesn't include North Mitrovica. So, you know, whether there's an agreement here or not, I think the Americans in particular who are involved in this, they don't care about the details. They don't, all they want is a Rose Garden ceremony so that President Trump can claim that he made a big international splash, because the administration has failed on all of its major diplomatic initiatives, North Korea, Iran. Everything is falling apart, and the coronavirus is making the Americans look very, very foolish right now. So the Trump administration really wants, above all, to have a big splash.
Having said that, I will just bring you back once again to these differences on the possibilities to have either final deal soon or to have the letter of intention. Don't you think that it's more realistic than to have the two presidents to sign the letter of intention that would still please Mr. Trump? At the end of the day, there will be a signature between the two sides, while all the problem would be again left to Europe, you know, to resolve in the upcoming months, if not years. And could that be something presented to the US public as great achievement of the US policy? Because at the end of the day, the two presidents could put the signature on the paper without really having clear commitment that there is a real broken deal.
Yes, I think that's a real possibility. This is a flim-flam administration, and it's capable of such flim-flam. I'm strongly opposed to any partition deal. There's just no question about that at all. I'm in favor of a deal. I think I just don't see a big deal as feasible at the moment. I do think a deal on the tariffs and on non-tariff trade barriers is a good idea, and that's what Mr. Grenell, that's the kind of thing Mr. Grenell says he's pursuing, is economic agreements, and I can be supportive of steps in that direction. So there are things that need to be done here. The electricity agreement needs to be implemented. There are lots and lots of things that need to be done. I think the Army Chiefs of Staff should be meeting. I think there should be more cooperation than there is between the police on both sides of the border or boundary, whichever you consider it. There are lots and lots of things that need to be agreed here. The thing that I oppose is not an agreement. I oppose an agreement that will destabilize the Balkans, destabilize Ukraine and Georgia, and maybe Moldova as well, and give Vladimir Putin bragging rights, and you know, at the expense of people, because there's no question in my mind that a land people swap agreement. It's important to understand that it's not just a land swap, it's a people swap. That kind of agreement will destabilize things inside Kosovo and in Serbia as well. I think it will spell the eventual end of the Serb population south of Ibar and of the Albanian population that doesn't live in Preševo inside Serbia. So I'm dead set against that agreement, but lots of agreements are possible and should be pursued.
Did I get the correct impression that you are very clear about that realistically, if anything happens within next several months, even if it's a letter of intention, that the two sides will eventually come to a fair, final, broken deal, that you still think, even in such form of the signed paper, there would be the land swap mentioned as particular term. Did I understand you correctly?
Well, I'm concerned that will be the case. I'm not sure that will be the case, no. And I oppose that being the case. There are many other deals to be had that don't involve the land swap, and it's my hope and prayer that the Americans, the Serbs, and the Kosovars will all pursue other agreements other than the land swap. One of the problems with the land swap, apart from my opposition in principle to the idea that you have to move people in order to get them treated correctly. I mean, there are real commitments by both Pristina and Belgrade to treat all people equally and correctly within the separate political entities, and they need to fulfill those commitments. But one of the reasons I oppose it is not only the problem in principle, not only the impact on Bosnia, on Ukraine, on Georgia, on Macedonia, but because I don't think the people want it. I think it can't be approved in a referendum in Kosovo at all. In Serbia, it's harder to predict because Vučić has a real stranglehold on the political life in Serbia. But I think it would not get the double majority in Serbia that's required in a referendum. So the notion that you go down this road and suffer all the negative consequences, and then there's no chance of actually getting the agreement confirmed by the people, it just makes it a terrible idea.
Okay, once again, just to remind you that Mr. Vučić very, very often denies any kind of his plan for the land swap or for the, in spite of speculation in the region. Do you leave any spare room that you may not be right?
I will be very glad if I'm proven wrong. I mean, my campaign at the moment is to avoid a land swap deal. And if a land swap deal doesn't come forward, I'll be happy. And I'll be even ready to praise them. And I have praised Grenell even just a couple of minutes ago for pursuing economic agreements. I don't think there's any doubt but that is a fruitful direction in which to go. And if he's sincere in saying that he wants to pursue that direction, I'm all in favor, But there's really no doubt in my mind that what they're pushing for is partition. The recent Russian moves to try to get into the dialogue and the American welcoming of that move was a clear indicator of what's up.
The final question, to get back to your expertise, courtyard. I don't know if you heard, but recently in influential Belgrade-based, actually it's a national Serbian paper, Politika, there was a headline on the Russian ambassador's statement. The title was that the Russia will support, that actually wants the Russia's open floor to the change of the resolution 1244. What do you think is behind that? Why would Russia change now this kind of stance when it for years was very outspoken about supporting the UN Security Council resolution? Could it be a scenario, in case it's true, that Russia wants to settle deal on some other issues like Abkhazia, South Ossetia, or Georgia?
It certainly could be, and it's part of the Russian effort to get into the dialogue. Only by saying something like this can they hope to be accepted into the dialogue. And then what they hope to do inside the dialogue is get American acceptance of the annexation of Crimea, independence of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, in exchange for something on Kosovo. It's not clear what they'd be prepared to do on Kosovo.
Something is what?
Well, we don't know. I mean, the Russians are going to be very vague about that, and they'll. It's not clear. The implication, of course, is that they would be prepared, if there's a deal on all these other things, to accept Kosovo into the UN, maybe even to bilaterally recognize the authorities in Pristina. But they're not making any promises. Anyone who could trust Moscow at this point to be inside the dialogue is they're going much farther than I would be prepared to go. I think this dialogue belongs to the European Union fundamentally, with support from the United States. If Russia wants to support it the way the United States does, I'm all in favor of that. But frankly, they're looking for their piece of the pie, and their piece of the pie is a piece of several other countries.
As you said, you're in this campaign of anti-campaigning of land swap or any kind of ethnic partition. What is the real reason to be that outspoken or campaigning against such idea? What is the real reason for you to be that much active? Is it because of your pure advocator of pro-independent, Kosovo pro-independent approach? Is it a matter of principle, or is it a geostrategical reason behind that in terms of the US or Russian relations?
Well, we say in America, I cut my teeth in the Balkans during the 1990s. And during the 1990s, America made a clear and unequivocal commitment to helping the Balkan countries that wanted to become liberal democracies that could enter the European Union. And a liberal democracy is one that treats everyone equally, that ensures equal rights for all of its population. And so it seemed consistent with the principle of land swaps, which is that only Serbs should govern Serbs, only Albanians should govern Albanians. And, so it's a matter of principle for me more than anything else, but also a matter of protecting people. I think this idea has the potential to harm not just tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of people who live as minorities in Balkan countries, in Ukraine and Moldova and Georgia. And I don't see any reason at all why those people should be harmed, why they should lose their homes, why they should lose their livelihoods. So it's a combination of pragmatism and principle that drives me. It is not my support for Kosovo independence, which I do support, but I have to admit to you, I was late to support Kosovo independence, and the Kosovars know that. I moved towards support of Kosovo independence years after the war. Why? Because same principle. It should have been possible in democratic Serbia to treat Albanians in Kosovo correctly. But what happened was, in fact, quite the opposite. There was no effort made in post-war Serbia, that is, in post-2001 Serbia, I'm talking about, and therefore post-Milosevic Serbia as well. There was no effort made to fix what Milosevic had broken by treating Albanians correctly within the Serbian political context. So, you know, Kosovo independence became a necessity, not because I supported it from the first, but because it was the only way for these people to get their rights. So principle and pragmatism combined, I feel confident in opposing land swaps.
Mr. Server, what do you think, what was preventing Kosovo authorities in post-war Kosovo to treat Kosovo Serbs as minority here in Kosovo equally, to protect their rights, in particular that it would seen as a real international project, to especially the US supported project, to implement the principle of equality amongst the people. And
I think the Albanians made a terrible mistake in the immediate post-war period by not treating the Serbs who had remained correctly. Those who remained were extremely courageous. I dealt with some of them personally in Gilan in particular, Gilanilane, and I helped to reconnect the Serbian and Albanian communities in Gilan very soon after the war under the auspices of the American troops there. And I was at the U.S. Institute of Peace. I think it was extremely important in that immediate post-war period for the Albanians to realize that their responsibility was to treat Serbs correctly. They didn't in that immediate post-war period. There's no doubt about that. There was first the chasing out of a substantial number of Serbs from south of the Ibar, and then there were communities that were not treated correctly for a long time. And my voice was always raised in favor of treating them properly. And it still is. It's not that I think all the problems have disappeared in Kosovo, but things have improved very substantially. There's no question in my mind about that either. Look,
to the regard that they are not physically exterminated or physically expelled from
but people also travel freely, even with Serbian license plates. I mean, you know, there are a lot of positive developments. And I think in the Albanian community, with which I'm in good contact, I think there's a growing recognition in the Albanian community that the Serbs, especially south of the Ibar, frankly, are one of the guarantees of Kosovo statehood. They're one of the reasons Kosovo is a separate state rather than part of Albania. I mean, if the land swap deal occurs, and if either quickly or slowly the Serb population south of the Ibar dwindles, why wouldn't Kosovo become the eastern province of Albania? And that, to me, would be a defeat, not a victory. That would be a shame. You know, Kosovo's uniqueness, what makes it different from Albania, there are many things, long difference in their histories, in their cultures, some language differences, some family differences. But when it comes right down to it, it's the presence of the Serbs that is one of the signal differences between Kosovo and Albania. And it's an important difference.
I will give you also like a counter argument, speaking of this uniqueness and comparison between Kosovo and Albania. Yet, speaking of the position of religions in Albania, it's very, very you know, the coexistence between the religion is very much visible, and speaking on many people from there, it seems like it's far more tolerated than there is a real tolerance here in Kosovo. It's rather coexistence than a real tolerance. But
yeah, I agree. I agree with that. But you have to remember that the Orthodox in Albania are regarded as Albanians.
Yes,
they're not Serbs.
That also can confirm and speak of quite difficult position of the remained Kosovo Serbs currently in Kosovo. You've mentioned something like that the presence of Kosovo Serbs is that it's clear to Albanians that this is the guarantee of their, as you said, statehood.
Their distinctness. I should have said their distinctness, which is reflected then in the statehood.
Okay, but then if you ask Kosovo Serbs, in particular Serbs in the south, if you ask them what do you think, what is the perception of Kosovo majority towards you, they will tell you, well, we know that we are necessary evil. Are they right with this kind of impression?
Well, certainly, they may be right with respect to certain officials in Pristina. They're in a better position to judge that than I am. The fact of the matter is there's a lot of bad blood and violence between Kosovo Serbs and Kosovo Albanians, a lot of it. And I've sat with people who've lost family members, lots of family members in some cases, in horrendous incidents on both sides. So the notion that, everything should be lovey-dovey now between Kosovo Serbs and Kosovo Albanians, that's not a notion that I can advocate at all. But I think they need to recognize that their coexistence is not only necessary, but mutually beneficial. And one of the things that's encouraged me in Kosovo in recent years is that people are finding practical reasons to work together. And I'm thrilled to see that.
It's about this practical reason. It's more with Kosovo Serbs to see practical reasons to cooperate with Albanians rather than it's vice versa. This is one of the complaints you will very often hear, the dwindling Kosovo Serb community complaining when they say that we are like a necessary evil to them. You mentioned very often this principle of equality. And you also, you given great attention to your speech to Columbia University when you spoke of what Kosovo could do in order to oppress the land swap. And then one of your advices was that whatever Serbia seeks for Kosovo solution, it should be vice versa. Albanians should ask in Serbia. And then you mentioned a number of reasons, but number of claims. So you also mentioned, to me it was interesting when you said that, okay, Kosovo Albanians should also ask for the municipality of Albanians in southern Serbia if Serbia insists, I'm paraphrasing, if Serbia insists on the association of Serb municipalities. I must remind you that there was an official deal on establishment of the association of municipalities run by Serbs in Kosovo. It was officially actually confirmed both by the first agreement in Brussels and then 3 years later by a technical deal signed in August 2015. Yet 5 years later, this has not been established. And from Belgrade, very often you will hear complaints about not moving from a zero phase in terms to have this. On the other side, we do have the association of Albanian municipalities in Serbia that functions. So what kind of reciprocity you are asking when you mention?
Well, I'm fine with the issue of the Serbian association inside Kosovo gives me no particular problems unless it violates the Kosovo Constitution. And the Constitutional Court has been very clear about what kind of association would, in fact, not violate the Constitution. And I think it's pretty much the same as the Albanian association inside Serbia. So the problem as I see it, and here this is, again, a question of diplomatic niceties, is that Serbia is asking for much more. At least that's what my Albanian friends in Pristina tell me, that Serbia is asking essentially for a Republika Srpska type entity within Kosovo that would even have veto power on decisions in Pristina. That is unacceptable to the Constitutional Court, and should be unacceptable to Serbia as well, because if the Albanian association inside Serbia had those powers, nothing would get done in Belgrade.
Have you read the technical agreement? It's available. It's publicly available. Have you read it?
You know, I've read it. I'm not remembering all of it, but I have read it. You know, it does. The idea of a Serb association per se is not what bothers me. It's only its consistency.
If it's in constitution.
Constitution.
Strange enough, there are also many voices within Serbian expert community which are very anti-SNS or to put this way, Vučić, who are criticizing the same technical agreement by saying that it does not provide any of what you mentioned, or what actually Kosovo Albanians very often complain of, that it doesn't give any kind of executive elements to Kosovo Serbs, but it's rather seen as an NGO, pretty much symbolic without a real essence.
Well, I think that is pretty much the proper role of municipal associations. You know, I was involved in the formation of the Kosovo Association of Municipalities after the war, which I think still exists and still is. It certainly involved the Serb municipalities when we first founded it. It serves the purposes of the municipalities probably in lobbying the capital for more resources, for clearer regulations, for smoother operations. I mean, you know, we have such associations at the state level, at the municipal level in the United States as well. It's a natural kind of thing for the lower levels of government to feel they have common cause in lobbying for their interests in the capital.
But you are aware of the criticism against the Constitutional Court here in Kosovo over the years, on the other hand.
Yeah, but I think the Constitutional Court has been a real asset in Kosovo. It has played a really crucial role at several junctures in the history of the country. It decided who could or who could not be president at least twice, if not three times. You know, this is, it's unusual to have a constitutional court as independent-minded as the one in Kosovo is. And I've met some of the judges. They're young, very well-trained lawyers, and some of them at least are young, very well-trained lawyers. And I have more confidence in the Constitutional Court than I do in some of other Kosovo institutions.
But you must be aware, Mr. Server, as someone who is very knowledgeable on the situation in Kosovo, over the years you must be aware at least of a portion of criticism against this court, that there is an opinion also as per which this court has been seen at least politically one-sided. And you've heard also Mr. Kurti very often criticizing. And also...
yeah, but the key here, I mean, I agree. All courts get criticism. If an issue comes to a court, it means there are two different sides with two different points of view, and whoever loses is gonna criticize. So all courts get criticism. But what does Albin Kurti do once he's in power? The first thing he does, one of the first things he does, is to take to the Constitutional Court the issue of whether a new government can be formed or not. This tells me that the Constitutional Court has real authority, because even somebody who's been very critical of it is prepared to take his case there and has some confidence that it will be heard fairly. And that's really important.
I also must ask one more question about the Constitutional Court, but actually you inspired me with this statement that it really has the authority. Are you aware that the Constitutional Court of Kosovo has made its final decision in 2016 on 24 acres of land around Visoki Dečani monastery, that it's a final decision that the land should be brought back to the monastery. Yet 4 years later, it's still a dead letter on the paper. We've just seen yesterday or 2 days ago, the EU ambassadors, the US and the UK ambassador, outspoken and reminding the role of the Constitutional Court. Now, the question...
I have also raised this issue repeatedly with the Kosovo authorities. I think it's extremely important. I think the decision has to be implemented, and there's no excuse for it's not being implemented, except that there are municipal and maybe national authorities who didn't like the decision.
But then how can we talk about the authority of the Constitutional Court if it's actually subordinated to the local structures?
Well, I would be critical of the local structures. I wouldn't be necessarily critical of the Constitutional Court. It made a decision, it made it correctly, so far as I know, and the local authorities have to bend to the decision of the Constitutional Court. That its authority is not unlimited is quite clear, but new countries have very difficult time establishing the authority of their courts. That was certainly true in the United States for the first half century of the Republic. The Supreme Court had difficulty establishing its authority. But I think they made a decision. It should be implemented. The criticism should be directed to the local and national authorities who blocked implementation of that decision. I'm completely in favor of implementation.
Mr. Server, thank you for talking to KoSSev.
It's a pleasure to talk with you.